Merry meet. Welcome, friends. So if you're interested in learning more about shadow work, I am going to share with you some of my favorite shadow work tips today. So while shadow work itself is not new, it is gaining a lot of traction in communities that are studying metaphysical and esoteric studies. And even within our own group, witches, pagans, empaths, and other spiritually minded people, we see a lot of people demanding this kind of work and in need of this kind of work. And I do believe it can really benefit our communities in a great way by increasing our intuition and by expanding our spiritual gifts and getting us that much closer to the divine. So if you're here with me live, I hope that we can much better. They're saying good. I was on live a little bit earlier and the microphone was not good. So I don't know what happened. Just chalk it up to Mercury retrograde. It went direct today, but we always have some disruptions of technology on the day that it goes direct or the day that it stations retrograde. So anyway, jumping in here. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and this episode today is all about shadow work tips. So if you're here with me live, you can always drop questions and comments into the feed, and I will get to those at the end. And if you're watching this back in replay, you can also leave me questions, and I'll get to those later as well. So let's start with what is shadow work. So I'm going to give a little brief overview, but after this overview, if you want more information, you can find more videos here in the Body, Mind, Witchcraft group. They're all pinned up at the top of the page. And also on our YouTube, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, we have a wide variety of videos, many of them about shadow work. I especially recommend the video Introduction to Shadow Work if you're looking for more details after this. But briefly, shadow work is a practice of self-healing, self-study, self-introspection. It allows us to go in and face our own darkness and really figure out what lies there in the unconscious. Much of this we're not aware of, and yet it is dictating our lives. So our shadow is composed of the rejected parts of ourselves, and sometimes people think that this is all the negative stuff, but in reality, our shadow is composed of those things that we consider to not be us, that's whatever's not me, that's your shadow. Now, that isn't all darkness. There's also light aspects there, as we're going to learn in some of these tips later. But what it all has in common is that it takes a tremendous amount of energy for us to suppress the shadow, to keep it at the fringes of our awareness and push it away. And this is energy that we could be using to do other things. For example, expanding our intuition, accelerating our magical, our spiritual gifts. And when we're no longer expending our energy trying to keep the shadow down, we will often see this amplification of our gifts and of our abilities and of our intuition, and even of our connection to the divine. So people who do a regular practice of shadow work, especially over a long term, it's not uncommon for those people to see tremendous increases in all of these things: intuition, their clair senses, their spell work, and even their magical practice, seeing an acceleration of that. So for these reasons, I believe that shadow work is a great practice for witches, empaths, other spiritually minded people, anybody who's on that path. This is a real way that you can improve everything about your craft. But it does take time. So it is true that any type of shadow work you do will help you. Anything you do will help you. Exercises, journaling. But those who see the greatest improvements are the ones who are able to commit to it and do it over the long term. Some will even say over the lifetime. It's a lifetime practice. Now, I don't really think that it's probably feasible for most of us to always be engaged in shadow work. So there will be times that we're doing that, and other times maybe we're doing energy work and other aspects of our healing or expanding our craft in different ways. But we're always kind of spiraling back and coming back to this kind of deep and healing and transformative work. So I'm going to dive right in, and we're going to start with a few tips. So here is my first tip today. We do not evolve spiritually just simply by being good people, doing good things, and sending love and light out into the world. So when I say this, sometimes I get a little bit of pushback from some people, but I really want to get in and explain what I mean by this. So, what the good book tells us, any of us who grew up as Christians, tells us that if you do good works and you're a good person and you trust in God and Jesus, you'll get to heaven. And while these are ways, following the Ten Commandments, no one's going to ever say that there's probably bad things in there necessarily. But these good things, while they do benefit, us and the fellow humans around us, the environment, other species and beings that we share this world with, at the same time, they don't really help us evolve individually. Now, if that's your goal, that's why shadow work is so important, because it's a big, nice, deep dig into the unconscious where we can explore what is there. So here's a really good analogy to think of. So if you know anything about the lotus flower is used in a lot of imagery and iconography, especially when it comes to spiritual evolution and expanding our consciousness. But if you know much about the lotus flower often grows in the muck and the mire and all of the mud, right? So out of this kind of dark grossness, we have this beautiful flower spring up pristine. And if we think about us, that's really what shadow work is about. It's a really good analogy that encompasses it all. So when we dig down into that muck and mire of ourselves, we have the potential to then bloom and blossom spiritually like that lotus flower. This is when we come face to face with all of this unconscious stuff that we are unaware of most of the time, day to day. These unconscious processes that are actually really informing and lending energy to our emotions, to our reactions, to our actions, to our feelings, and they're basically dictating what is going on. We're just not even aware of this. So when you could start to understand your shadow, at least aspects of it, you start to understand where some of these motivations come from, then you have the power to choose whether or not you will be influenced by them. And that's truly where your power lies. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to take away all the bad stuff. It doesn't mean that it's going to take away all your triggers and you're never going to be influenced by any of them. But what it does do is it gives you back a bit of your power. And this is the way that we can truly begin to evolve emotionally and spiritually, because we're no longer expending all of that energy, keeping that stuff down in the unconscious. So that leads me to the second tip here, which is our triggers are our gifts from the universe. So people will often ask me, where do I even begin? And the simplest place is by analyzing your triggers. So your triggers can be your greatest teachers. And if you look at it in a certain way, you could see them as these gifts that the universe is giving to you. Because when you get triggered by something, it shows you an aspect of yourself that you are ready to look at and perhaps heal and even transcend. So when you're triggered, rather than projecting it out onto something else, or rather than thinking of it as an external thing, you can instead turn the mirror back around on yourself and explore what's there. So what inside of you is being triggered and why? You can look at the how, when, and where that you have embodied any of these traits. So perhaps you are triggered by someone that you work with, someone in your family, someone that you're just passing by on the street. And while it's true that this person has done something, likely, and it doesn't negate what they've done in any way, you have some ability to expand your consciousness and do some deep self-healing if you can look at it from a different frame of mind. So turning it around, and what can I learn from this? Have I ever embodied any of these traits? Am I embodying them now? Perhaps not. Maybe it was a while back. But still, all of that is influencing your shadow. So often one of the first exercises and one of the best exercises that people can do in shadow work is just this. Looking and analyzing their triggers and keep coming back to that exercise over and over and over again. Doesn't have to be every time you get triggered, but when you're ready to explore a little, use it as a learning experience. So that brings me to the third tip, and that is your shadow can hold immense creative power. So remember in the beginning, I said that people often have this misconception that the shadow is all the darkness. And while a big portion of it is, there's also a light part of your shadow. So if the shadow is defined as all those things that we consider not me, there's good things that you consider not you as well. So the shadow does contain all the rejected parts of ourself, anything that our society looks at as not good, perhaps our nuclear family or those around us looked at as not good, teachings from the church, from your school, things like that. All of those things that get rejected off that were not considered okay to have, habits or aspects of you or personality traits, that is in the shadow. But another part of the shadow are the hats or the different roles that we tried on in life that we, for one reason or another, did not pursue. So a lot of these happened when we were young, but this could be any time in your lifespan, but especially when you're young. You want to go back and see if you can look at some of these things. So there is a lot of untapped creative energy in the shadow because of this. So when we engage in shadow work regularly, what will often happen to us is we, at some point, become very surprised at how much more creative we become or how much more creative energy we have. And it's for this very reason. It's because we're starting to tap down into that part of the shadow. So I've told this story before, and I'll share it here briefly as a good example. So when I was probably 4 years old, maybe 4 or 5 years old, I was enrolled in ballet school. And I don't know the full story, and my mom doesn't really remember much of it. But I know that I did not last more than a day. In fact, I don't even think I lasted the full day before I came home. And the narrative, the story that I grew up with was that I just simply wasn't coordinated enough or I was too clumsy to be a ballerina. So this is a story that stayed with me for a long time, all through my adult life. And years later, I, in college, began dabbling in yoga, but there was always that narrative in the back of my mind that I'm too clumsy. I was too clumsy, too uncoordinated to do ballet. Well, surely I'm too clumsy. I'm too uncoordinated. I'm not flexible enough. I can't do the yoga. And so I dabble and I knew that there was something in it that was very healing for me. You know, we all have those pathways. It's not for everybody, but for me, I could tell there was something in that pathway that was for me, but I couldn't get past that narrative that I had picked up early on. So eventually, what happened is I guess that the desire to pursue the path of yoga overcame all those fears and that narrative. And so eventually, I was offered this unique opportunity to train to be a yoga teacher. And it was one that I could not pass up. So I almost didn't do it, but I ended up doing it, and it really did change my life because as I started doing that, I started teaching other people, and I really, really, truly committed to my own practice. I realized that I wasn't clumsy and that I wasn't uncoordinated and I was flexible with time, and I was able to rewrite that narrative. So everybody's story is going to be different. That one just highlights, that. And I could unravel a story that had existed from an early, early, early age. And now I could look at it in a different way. So, for you, if you can explore aspects like this of your own life, kind of think back, what are some things that you tried that for one reason or another you didn't pursue? And if you can find some of those, could you bring any aspect of that back into your life? So there's other things I could have done with the ballet story. I could have started going to watch the ballet. I could have taken a ballet or a dance lesson. I chose the path of yoga because that was the one that called to me. So see, everybody's story will be different. But if you can figure out a way to bring a bit of that thing into your life, that hat, that role you tried on that you didn't pursue, this is a way that we can begin to heal the shadow. And then that brings me to the fourth tip, which is you can heal your inner child through your shadow work, and vice versa. You can really do your shadow work through your inner child. So, a good portion of our shadow self was created when we were very, very young. And some of this is so far back in early childhood that we really don't have memories. But what we do know about the mind is the mind contains way more than we know on the surface. So there's a lot of stuff that's unconscious that you do have access to. You just don't have access to it right now. So your inner child, because your inner child lived through all of that, and remembers it, can offer you some of the best guidance when it comes to your own shadow work journey. So, what I would suggest doing is thinking about some of the earliest memories that you have. And they may range greatly in what they are. So, you could spend a little bit of time jotting some of these down. And then, after a time, I would separate them into positive and negative memories. So most of the memories that are going to be affected or we will be able to use for our shadow work are probably going to be on the negative side. So once you're able to see which of those memories are negative, then you can start to search for any patterns. So like, are there specific feelings that were attached to this set of memories? What do they have in common? Can you see a common thread? And jot down whatever is coming up for you. And this is a good tip as well. So when it comes to shadow work, it's really important to have some place where you're writing things down. Now, I myself have never really been big into journaling. I kind of roll my eyes when I would take those yoga classes or I was in trainings and it would make us journal. Some people really get a lot out of it, but for some reason, I didn't get a ton out of it. But what I have found is there's a way that you can make journaling work for you, because the trouble is with all of this shadow work, a lot of it, things will come up in bits and pieces. And in the moment, they don't really make any sense. But over time, they will be revealed. As more and more things start coming to the surface, you'll start to understand what is happening in this overall pattern. But if we didn't write all that down, remember, these are just like things that are bubbling up, and especially those things that kind of come up during the shadow work and you don't quite know what they mean, well, they are barely scratching the surface of the consciousness. So it is so easy for them to just go back down into the unconscious, and then you kind of lose them. It's like a dream. When you first wake up, you have all of that memory of the dream, but as you stay awake, you start to forget large portions of it. So the same thing works here. So what I suggest is finding a way that works for you where you can record some of this stuff. It doesn't have to be specifically journaling. You don't even have to call it that. Just take notes of what's coming up for you so you can go back and you can look at it later and it will make more sense later. So also, you can work with your inner child in another way. I really like this way a lot. So you think about it, the inner child is you, and I believe that the inner child has just as much validity. Like, it may not be here physically with us, but it exists etherically, it exists energetically, exists emotionally. And so if we treat it like a being that is real, like any other being, we can actually learn a lot from it. And the happier that we make that inner child, the happier we then make ourselves, essentially, because that inner child starts to work with us when it comes to all this self-healing. So here's another question to ask yourself when you're kind of exploring that inner child work is, what is something that you always wanted as a child? And this answer can be anything. You just see what comes up. You may have more than one answer here. And you can also explore material versus non-material things. So sometimes when we ask this question in the group, people will have material things and they'll have non-material things. So they'll say all kinds of things: horses, dolls, different toys, but then they'll also say, love, understanding, acceptance. So just explore what is coming up for you along all of those avenues. And then once you have that, I would recommend, again, writing it down. You don't have to call it journaling, just take these notes and then think about it a little bit more deeply. So really explore what aspect of your life does this affect right now. So do you have any of these things in your life right now? And if you do, then think about what it would mean for your inner child. So perhaps you can even imagine your inner child there with you experiencing these things now. And if you realize that you still don't have any of these things, or one or more of these things, is there a way that you could bring them into your life now in some way? So for perhaps buying yourself a toy, or taking yourself on an inner child date, which is really fun, where you find something that you know your inner child liked, a food, a place to visit, a sight to see, and take them on that date and just experience it with them. And it could also be enriching your own emotional environment that you have now. If you thought that the thing you were missing when you were a child was kind of that emotional stability or that emotional support. There's no right or wrong way to do this exercise. It's just you coming up with lists of things and then seeing, do I have these things now? Do I not have these things now? And how could I support my inner child by bringing these aspects into my life in some way if I don't have them? So when we begin to heal that inner child, we really truly begin to heal the adult that inner child became. And they're such a great ally for us on our shadow work journey. That's really what shadow work is at its core. So I'm going to share one more tip here, and I'm going to look at a few questions in the comments and then any others that are coming up. But my final tip of today is really using the universal energy that's going on around you in order to deepen your shadow work. So what I mean by this is you can do shadow work at any time. You can do any of this work at any time, but there are times that it's lends itself a little bit better to the work because of what's going on energetically in either the lunar cycle or the solar cycle. So our shadow work is most aligned to the second half of the lunar cycle, so that would be the waning half, and it is especially once we cross into the last quarter. So if you're watching this live or within the next couple of days, we are in this period right now. So what happens is that oftentimes we'll feel more called or pulled inward during the waning half of the cycle, especially, these last 5 or 6 days. And this can really deepen our experience of that shadow work. So whatever work you are doing during any part of the cycle, you can also use this time to really release around that. So I really like this idea a lot. So sometimes I'll find that I'm really pulled to start doing some of this work. I'll start reflecting on things, or like I said earlier, those triggers coming in from the universe, maybe I'll notice them coming in more and more. And it's like the universe is tapping me on the shoulder, telling me this is something that you could work on if you want to, if you're willing to. So once you start to explore that, then you start to do the shadow work. But then what happens is when we pass into the balsamic moon, so the balsamic moon is the 3 days right before the new moon. This is like the darkest, deepest part of the cycle when we have the most ability to release. So anything that came up during that shadow working happening in this part or any part of the cycle, you can let go of. So what I like doing is doing a ritual around the dark moon. It could be any time in that balsamic, those 3 days right before the new moon, or the dark moon itself, which is the day right before the new moon, and do something that releases any of that residual energy or emotions that had come up during the work. So whatever it is, anything I don't want to take into my next cycle, I will let go of it then. So this could be as simple as writing all of it down on a piece of paper and then destroying that paper in some way, ripping it up. I like to do that, or burning it. Or another thing that's really neat to do is to write it on a piece of paper, rip it up, and then put it into a bowl of water. And then as you see the ink fade off the paper, imagine that you're letting go of that. So we don't have to let go of everything all at once. Like I said in the beginning, this is a gradual process, but if we do this cycle after cycle, we do our shadow work, we do our energy work, and then we do our releasing, then we start to really find that our healing becomes much more profound. So before I get into the questions, I wanted to share one thing here because, and I cannot remember, I don't even know if the person's live here, but she might be because I can't remember who it was who had asked me about sleeping issues last week. But I said I would share an exercise, and so for anybody can use this exercise. It's also very good for helping you sleep and for helping calm the central nervous system. So if you're feeling anxious, this is a good one to try. So this is called the Peacemaker. I learned this exercise from Dr. Melanie Smith, and she is an expert on the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is a nerve that people are beginning to explore more, and it really has a lot to do with our activation or our deactivation of the central nervous system. So there's this spot right behind your ear. It's like in that little notch behind your ear. And they call this the vagus hole, or she sometimes calls it the vagus gateway. So what you do is you take your middle finger and you're going to place it in that little nodule right behind the ear. And then just let your hand cup your chin like this. And then take your other middle finger and then you're going to place it in that same spot but on the other side. So it looks something like this. And then you'll just close your eyes. And then if you've ever done Ujjayi breath before, Ujjayi breath is sometimes called like Darth Vader breath or ocean breath. So you can do it pretty easily by if you just imagine that you were fogging up a mirror like that sound, but you're going to close your mouth and you're going to breathe through the nose. So it's just an audible breath essentially. And so what she recommends is that you do this breath for about a minute. And I'll tell you is that when I tried it, it looks very simple, but when I tried it, it was such an immediate calming breath that I knew I could use it to help with sleep. So I recommend if you're having trouble, just try it a minute or two. And if you got any questions about it, message me. Another way that you can do it is another variation where you just do it with your right hand. So that middle finger in that nodule, and then the rest of the hand is just going to cradle the chin. And then you'll take your left hand and place it on your forehead. And then you just do that same audible breath with your mouth closed. And then after a while, you can then move your left hand down to your heart and continue the breath. But a very, very good way to, deactivate that central nervous system. Okay, so let me look at a couple of these questions here. So I see that Misty asks, what if because of the trauma someone went through as a child and adult, some of our shadow selves are extremely dark, even though our souls and thoughts are not? Does this make sense? Yes, absolutely. So that is part of what this is. So people will have these very, very dark images, dark memories, dark thoughts, dark feelings, and it makes us feel bad or wrong. So like you were saying, even though our souls and thoughts are not. So even though where you are, where you have evolved to, you feel that you're not there, you're still having these thoughts. And it's very uncommon. We all have them. So those of us who have experienced more trauma and darker trauma will probably have more of these than others, and some will have less. But the reality is we all have these dark thoughts. So that is what we're doing with the shadow work, because remember, we're pushing it away. And the darker that these thoughts or these memories or this energy is, the more we're going to push it away. So the more resistant it's going to be to our work. But when we turn that mirror around, we start exploring it, we start to reintegrate it back in, and then we're able to release it eventually, or at least, perhaps we can't release it right away, but we're at least beginning to disempower it as we start to explore it. That's where our true healing is gonna be. But yes, it makes a lot of sense to have some of these shadow selves be extremely, extremely dark. Okay. And then I'm just going down the list. Tanessa asks, what do you do when you found your narrative, then how to work on it? Okay, so if you find that there's a narrative that is incorrect, so for example, that one I shared about the coordination and the ballet and everything, the first step, that's the first step, because as you begin to explore this and you start to acknowledge it, you start to disempower it just simply by you becoming aware. But as you explore it further, you eventually want to release it. And this is like what I did, right? I took that chance with the yoga class. Like I'm telling you, like I almost asked for my money back. I was so scared the night before. I tried to talk myself out of it in so many ways, but I pushed forward through the fear because I just knew in my soul that there was something that I had to do on that path. And so as I experienced that, I was then able to rewrite it. So the real true way to begin to rewrite that narrative or work on it is to kind of push through it. So what can you do to challenge it in some way? And let's see what else. Hopefully that helps. If you could continue asking questions here, if you want to elaborate on the question too, or if I didn't answer exactly what you needed. Angela says, what is your suggestion about unblocking memory shadow work that can cause extreme anxiety? So I would assume, since you're saying unblocking, that you mean the memories are blocked, like you can't access them. So if you got anything to elaborate on, or I'm going the wrong path with the question, then let me know. But I'm going to take it from that way. So, okay, she says yes. Okay, so the thing about your shadow work is that you don't necessarily need to experience the memory again in order to let it go. And I know that sounds kind of strange, and we're always searching for these kind of blocked memories. And the reality is that some of them may be so far down and they may literally be too hard to ever access. I don't want to say ever, because I do believe that we can dig down and get them at some point. But some of those deeper ones, they may not come at first. So what I suggest is that if there is stuff that is coming to the surface that you are accessing, so like memories that you have right now, those are the ones that I would start working with. And as you work with them, what you're going to find is you're going to be able to access the deeper and deeper levels. Now, if you want to try to get into them a little sooner than later, you can always try, if you're able to find a therapist who specializes in hypnosis, some kind of a hypnosis practice, that can help. Sometimes they can dig down and they can help you access some of those memories. But there's also a lot of videos. If you go on YouTube, and if I'll see if I can find one that I would recommend. But there's videos where it's almost like a self-hypnosis, and they will talk you down into a place where potentially you could unblock a memory. Now, the thing is, when the memories cause extreme anxiety, your unconscious is going to do whatever it can to try to not have you have access to that. So that's why the hypnosis can kind of help, or those self-hypnotizing videos can help, because they will help break through it. But I do believe is that over time, over a lot of shadow work, I've noticed that there are memories that I honestly thought that were probably lost. I thought I'd probably never be able to access things that happened. And I started to notice them coming to the surface. And I really didn't do anything to try to access them. I simply was just doing the shadow work. I was working on what I could access right now. I was doing my energy work. I was doing all of it. And I just started to see them coming up. Let's see what else is here. So Tanessa said, if they are deep or painful, come up, just see it then and move it to another one that's not so painful. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good, okay. Yes. So if you do have a memory that comes up during the work that you feel is too painful, and it's one that you don't feel that you're ready to explore, you absolutely can move on to one that is less painful. So those will be ones that are going to be a little easier to heal. And then over time, you may find that you're better able to access and kind of stay and like sit through the one that was really, really painful. Another thing that you can try is to, you do have this really profound ability to heal yourself just using the energy of your own body, especially in your heart chakra. So your heart has a great ability to kind of dissolve some of the charge that is in that memory, because the memory itself is just it's a memory. The pain is part of the charge, that energetic charge that's like attached to this memory. So you can practice this with less painful memories until you feel like you're pretty good at the technique. And so what you do is you kind of close your eyes, and then you let a memory that you're kind of able to work with, even if it's a little painful and sad and you don't like it, kind of let it come into your mind. And then you're going to breathe very deeply, and you're going to breathe and you're going to pull that emotional charge. So whatever your feeling is coming up for you, you're going to pull that into your heart space. So just imagine that coming into your heart, and then just imagine it dissolving there. So the heart is so expansive. It's like the universe. So it has the ability to just dissolve out all of that charge. So until we're ready to really deal with the extremely painful memories, we may need to practice this with some less painful ones. But over time, you'll find that you probably do have the capacity to go and face those deeper ones when you're ready. So I hope that helps. So that is the rest. That's all I can see here in the feed. I think I got everybody's. So if anybody else has got anything to add, let me know. So I'm also going to tell you what's coming up. So next week I'm going to be here talking about meditation. So there's a lot of different meditation techniques, and this video is good for those who are good at meditating and want to try some new ones, or for those people who are having trouble meditating. You might discover there are different types that will work better. So sometimes we think meditation is all about just closing our eyes and just opening up the expansiveness of the mind, and it's not. That is not the only way. So there are a lot of other ways that we can do it, and we're gonna go ahead and explore that next week. And then after that, it's actually Imbolc, or Candlemas, some people call it, and we're gonna do a whole episode talking about that and techniques and different things that you can do to celebrate that part of the wheel of the year. It's personally one of my favorite holidays of the wheel. I consider it darker than Yule in a lot of ways, because it's that deepest, darkest part of the winter, and it's just an ability to kind of turn inward and de-thaw all that ice and really expand out and start to look forward to the spring that's coming. So we have that coming. And then for those of you who are interested in shadow work and energy work, our Shadow Seekers membership is going to be reopening at the end of February to take in a handful of new members. So if you're already on my wait list, for example, if you've told me you are interested in it when you joined this Body, Mind, Witchcraft group, I've got you on my list. But if you're unsure and you want to be on the list, just make sure comment or message me and let me know, because the people on the list will get the first offering of the spots. And we do expect the spots to all fill up like they did last time. So let me see before I go if there's anything else here. Yeah, and Misty added that doing shadow work with grief counseling work is actually really good. Yeah, I do recommend. That's another tip that we could add on to is, doing your shadow work, but also having the support of a counselor or someone trained in it, or not necessarily in shadow work, but someone who's trained in either grief counseling or counseling in general. It can be really helpful, even if you don't see that person all the time. Just seeing that person from time to time can be so helpful, and they have a different take on everything too. So, okay, I'm going to sign off, but if I miss any of these questions or comments, I will go in and I'll look at the feed later. And if you want to add anything afterwards, I will come through and I will answer everybody's questions. All right, until next time, blessed be.